Hello and welcome back to another Tradelands videos. You guys really enjoyed the last video. I got a ton of support, ton of love. I really appreciate it. I love making videos like this, and you guys hyping me up just makes me want to make more videos. I really appreciate the support. Thank you to everybody over here for just liking, just commenting, telling me how I can improve. I really appreciate it. But we got to get to the task, and that is going to be finishing up and rounding up all the last of the faction videos. In today's video, we're going to be going over the lesser factions within the game. This is going to include Verdentine, Besca, Meadow Fleet, and Markham. We'll start off by just going over the dead factions, being the first three I listed, and then we'll go over the other factions within the game. I will not be going over factions such as like Normandy or Moria, because they're too linked into Prushovia. However, I will make an in-depth video about Prushovia in the near future, which will then talk about these other provinces. The same with Yola, and the same can also be applied to whatever other faction has like sub-factions within it. But get into the very first faction we're going to be talking about, which is going to be the Verdentine Sovereignty. Now, if you played the game way back when, ancient ass player, then you would actually know that Verdentine used to be a pretty prominent faction within the game. It played an integral part of the lore. The island was called Verdentine, which is what the island is still called. The Verdentine Sovereignty was a Prushovian colony originally, which you can see here. However, it was given independence after its founding, and it ruled itself until the start of Tradelands, which really began the whole shebang. The Verdentine Sovereignty fought in a couple wars with Whitecrest, but the last and final war it fought was between a new faction called the Verdentine Expedition. Verdentine, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you like and who you served, was taken down by the Verdentine Expedition and the Whitecrest forces, pretty much eliminating the entire faction. The island was annexed by the Verdentine Expedition, and the Verdentine Expedition formed the nation of Nova Besca, and instead forming as a kind of hegemony republic over the Verdentines, which the Verdentines were forced to flee to Port Werner, now owned by Halengard, or they were going to be assimilated into the Nova Besca nation. All of these qualities make the Verdentine Sovereignty really, really cool in terms of just background lore building for the Tradelands world, and just being that faction that was around that got completely taken over, completely removed from the game. Now, before I move on to the next faction, I cannot progress without stating a few of the Verdentine relics, I guess you could say, that are in the game still. The Verdentine Brassworks is one of the oldest companies or corporations within the game. They are responsible for creating brass, a resource that has been around technically for a while, but was not added as a physical resource until NAR decided to add it around a year ago. The Verdentine Brassworks is where brass is supposed to come from, making Verdentine, or just the Verdentine island now, the only place where brasses truly come from. The Verdentine Sovereignty is also known for its salt, which is on the island of Verdentium, and it is mined from there in the lore reasons, and for just lore purposes, salt is mined and taken from the mines of Verdentium and processed and shipped out. This is what the Verdentine Sovereignty was doing, and when the Nova Bescans took over, they also repeated the process. Verdentine Sovereignty is also known for their extremely sought-after cape known as the Verdentine Cape, which was only around for the duration of the faction's existence, which was about several months to a year. They weren't around for super long, but they were around long enough to really set themselves in within the Tradelands community. That's pretty much going to wrap it up for everything you need to know about the old Verdentine Sovereignty. It is a very unique nation. There's a lot of fans for it. I personally really like these guys. However, they are no longer a faction anymore. There are possibilities for the faction to come back. NAR has stated this before. However, for it to come back, there needs to be some sort of group representing the Verdentines and winning against the Nova Bescans, retaking the territory that the Verdentines held before, for any chance of a Verdentine Sovereignty to ever come back. Now we're going to be moving on to the very same faction that took over the Verdentines in the first place, being the Werner Expedition. For background kind of knowledge of the Werner Expedition, they come from the continent of Balresk, and they're kind of like the remnants of the Republic of Balresca, which I'll be talking about shortly after this. The Balreskans were pretty much forced off the island. The Balreskans and the Werner Expedition also had several Inyolans, as I believe slaves, on their ship as well. They were using an atlas, trying to traverse to somewhere where a new homeland would be adequate, and they managed to crash land at where Fort Werner is now. They erected the fort, calling it Fort Werner after the Werner Expedition. The atlas can still be seen at Fort Werner. There is also a fun fact: there is a map within the broken atlas, which is not the map used in the main Tradelands game, but is instead a special map which kind of mapped out what the world kind of looked like before the maps we have now, which show pretty much all the like the territories and stuff of the Tradelands world map. But that same map was kind of like the blueprint, so that's a fun fact. You can still see that map in the same atlas by going to Fort Werner, and you can view it from there. The Werner Expedition, of course, went to war with the Verdentines. With the aid of Whitecrest, they managed to take down the Verdentine Sovereignty, claiming the entire territory and pretty much disbanding the entire sovereignty. Now, if you were a Werner fan, then you probably really like this, but if you were part of Verdentine and you were there to see the faction fall, then you know, want. I believe that the Werner Expedition is pretty interesting. I wish there was just a little bit more knowledge we knew about them, but because they were only around for a very short duration, there really isn't much known about them. We do know that their cape was only out for about a week, because the Werner Expedition was only around for a very short duration, so that makes the Werner cape super valuable. Werner flag is now the Novo Balrescan's navy flag, which is pretty unique into itself. So there's still a bode to the Werner Expedition, and the Fort Werner, as named by the Werner Expedition, is now the home island of the Halengard Nation, which I went over in my very first video uploaded to this account. Now we're going to be moving on to where the Werner Expedition comes from, which is going to be Balresca. Now, Balresca held the Republic of Balresk, which was the nation that is responsible for the Werner Expedition. Now, the Balreskans have quite a lot of influence within the entire just Tradelands world. From a historian known as Weswolder, he has told me that the Balreskans have kind of just split around everywhere. There are Balreskans in Yola, there are Balrescan influences in Moria, there are Balrescan influence in Berkland even, but mainly it's going to be condensed into Nova Balresca, which I of course went over in my first video, and they are the fathers of the Werner Expedition, which turned into Nova Balresca. Nova being new, Balresca being the nation. Now, the Balresk Republic was taken down by an unknown enemy. That is like what it was labeled as, and we don't know what this mysterious enemy was that destroyed the Balresk Republic. However, we do know that they destroyed the capital city of Balresk, which was known as Yorktown, and I'm pretty sure once that city was destroyed, the Balresks just decided to just up and leave, leaving their other towns and cities that they had on the island to find a new homeland, eventually landing on Nova Balresca. There was actually some sort of expedition trying to go back to Balresk in order to reinstate the Republic and back in the homeland. However, when they arrived there was just nothing there, and I guess the Balreskans just didn't want to rebuild. Nova Balresca was good enough for them. There you have it with the Republic of Balresk. There simply just isn't much history about them. We do know that they may have been a colony by the Morians from my boy Weswolder, but we're not 100% sure. We just know that they were destroyed and that they are responsible for the Werner Expedition and later the Nova Balrescan Nation. That is going to be it for the 3 deceased factions. However, we're going to be going over the 2 other factions that need to be going over, which is going to be the Viceroyalty of Meadow Fleet and the Kingdom of Markham. Now, there's actually not much information known about Markham, but there is a little bit of information known about Meadow Fleet, and I'm going to talk about Meadow Fleet right now. The thing with Meadow Fleet is it was kind of added into the game via a community person known as Zivenwolf. However, Zivenwolf was low-key an EDP. Diddy's elite warrior, you know. Dr. Disrespect's chief lieutenant. I mean, this guy was not good for the community. when people kind of figured out what his little backwards tendencies were, he's kind of no longer around in Tradelands. Now, of course, these are all pretty much allegations, but these might have been confirmed. I'm not 100% sure. I wasn't there to see his trial, and he's no longer in Tradelands to defend himself, so that pretty much concludes the fact that this dude was low-key not good. However, he is gone, and we haven't really heard much about Meadow Fleet since then. There are instances of Meadow Fleet via the Cape. Nat Nick, one of the moderators in Tradelands, does own one of these capes. I think somebody else also one of these capes, but Zivenwolf owns the other copy, and because he doesn't play the game anymore, that copy of the Meadow Fleet cape is lost with him. All history we know about Meadow Fleet was that it was a little colony of some sort of faction, but eventually it came under the Ignolans, becoming an Ignolan colony. So the faction of Meadow Fleet has several ties to Ignola, while also having ties with whatever the base culture of Meadow Fleet was prior to Ignolan colonization. Will there ever be another Meadow Fleet contact within the game? Because there was a small Meadow Fleet like faction belonging to Zivenwolf. He was like the only character to be introduced with the Viceroyalty of Meadow Fleet, and it's very possible that we might get more sights of the nation of Meadow Fleet. I honestly think they have a really cool concept and a really cool flag. However, due to the history of Zivenwolf, the previous Viceroy, I don't really know if we're ever going to see Meadow Fleet ever again, but we might. Now, we're going to be going over the last and final faction. Now, I try to classify this faction as a theoretical faction. We don't know if it's 100% like really there, but we do know that there are instances of it within the game, and Weswolder has confirmed that it is a real faction. However, we really don't know much about Markham. We do know that the king is named King Gabriel. He has ties to Berkland, being a Burkish colony before its independence. The kingdom of Markham is responsible for the Markhamite resource, which is like a cheese stone. So like a yellow stone with like cheese qualities, but it's not actually cheese, it's just a yellow stone, which is pretty cool. Markham is also rumored to be responsible for the creation of the Nautilus ironclad. It might be, it might not be, we're not 100% sure, but Markham is probably out there somewhere, and they're definitely cooking up some interesting things in that little nation. Anyways, I am pretty sure that's every single thing about these lesser known factions that I can go over in this video. These factions are pretty unknown for the most part, besides Verdentine Sovereignty, because the Verdentine Sovereignty has been around for quite a little bit before being destroyed by, of course, the Burner Expedition. There's so much more I would like to know, but I just can't share it in this video, or just blatantly don't know, and that's pretty much all I can really reference within today's video. I hope you guys found this video informative, entertaining. If you did in any way, please support the channel, like, subscribe. It helps the algorithm. It makes me feel happy. It makes you feel happy. And that's pretty much going to do it for this entire lore video. This is going to be the last lore video of the faction collections. Unless there's a new faction added, I'll probably just go over that faction alone. If you guys are looking for more faction videos, or more like a more in-depth review of a faction, do let me know. But for now, that was it. Thank you. Goodbye.
Get jiggy with it. Yeah. Get jiggy with it. Get jiggy with it. Get jiggy with it. Get jiggy with it. Know what I'm saying? No, I can't get jiggy with it. Goddamn.